Welcome to the In Shape Fitness Show. I'm Coach Kim. Thank you so much for joining me. Today's podcast is called Pivoting. One leg works harder than the other. In my book, Darwin on the Treadmill, I highlight 8 functional movement patterns from which all workout regimens, body weight workout regimens can be based. One of them is called pivoting. And that is how I define the reality that one of your legs is stronger than the other and therefore works harder than the other. Over time, this slight, something you don't even notice, you visibly can't see one leg being bigger than the other, but this slight difference can lead to gait imbalances and therefore overuse issues. So join me as I talk a little bit about the basis for this imbalance, what causes it, and then we're going to talk about a couple of really simple body weight exercises that you can and should do, incorporate into your workout regimens every single day in order to combat the issue and stay strong and functionally healthy for the duration of your life. It really doesn't have to matter how old you are. In fact, one of my fellow running coaches here in New York City just turned 80 years old, and the man is still running. He is still coaching. He's still vibrantly living his life every single year, and it's it doesn't matter that he's 80 years old. I know other people that are in their 50s and 60s, actually some even in their 40s, who complain about the age that strikes every year on their birthday and how old they're getting and how the limits just keep piling on in terms of the things that they can do. But it really just doesn't have to be that way. It is a factor for you to think about. Pivoting is a great way to describe this movement pattern because the body, the human body, we're the only real, serious mammals moving around that have 2 legs without a tail, right? So we move by pushing one leg off of the other, alternating one foot from the other, this pattern until we reach a destination. And even if it's just getting up from the chair to move to the bed, or getting up from the bed to move to the toilet seat or whatever, no matter what the distance or whether it's a long run, a marathon even, human mobility is defined and created by this pivoting pattern, one leg, then the other, over and over and over. The ability for you to do this is pre-programmed into your brain, your human brain, the primitive part of your brain. It takes about a year, typically for babies, obviously, to develop the strength to move on 2 feet. But once you take those first steps as a kid, you're off and moving around. And that is a really important evolution within the human lifespan, an individual's lifespan, that makes a big difference to the types of life that you live. When infants are infants and they're not moving around, they're stationary. But once you are able to start moving on 2 feet, that's what you're meant to do. So by the time you're full grown, pivoting from one leg to the other has developed into this pretty much a consistent, comfortable pattern that doesn't require conscious thought at all. And this is where the problems set in some ways, right? So walking is simply something that you do. Running is simply something that you do. And from a standing position, which means that you're upright and you're steady with your feet positioned about hip width apart, essentially from that postural systems check position that we tend to do at the beginning of a lot of my podcasts. This center of gravity that you maintain as a human upright person is stable. Now, it gets destabilized when one foot flexes and pushes off of the floor. Your center of gravity is no longer in the same exact place. It shifts slightly, which destabilizes your body temporarily. And then a reciprocal movement of the other foot slingshots off of the center of gravity through the body when the trailing foot moves, and then you develop a rhythm as you move more than a couple of steps. The alternating movement pattern, your cadence, which is the technical term that's used, it's repeated over and over again. In terms of muscles that are used, it involves your feet, all the little muscles that connect the foot bones, and they're all kind of funky, the toe bones. So the muscles and soft tissues of your feet, your ankles, your shins, your calves, your thighs and hamstrings, your hips, your glutes, your core, and even your upper body and your head and your neck. You have, especially if you're moving quickly or maybe jogging or running, the stability that's required to maintain your head's position is a significant metabolic force, because your head is really heavy. I talk about this a lot because a lot of the workout type of work that we do at In Shape Fitness is really focused on the small functional things that make a huge difference in your everyday life, not about your ability to look good in a bathing suit on the beach in the summertime, or about, squeezing into your jeans, or even, just losing those unwanted winter pounds that you might gain. Now, we do that, but what's more important from an everyday fitness perspective is having the ability to sort of trigger, to consciously call upon your posture neutrality and deviations that you might experience through your daily activities that make a mess of your posture, right? Like sitting. I'm actually kind of doing it right now. I'm trying to sit up as I'm talking because my head is pitched forward a little bit, and that forward movement or forward position of your head is a really bad thing for your posture, and it strains your neck, it collapses your shoulders. But anyway, so the movement pattern, going back to the pivoting sort of the cadence of your movement patterns, your feet and your legs and all the muscles that are in use when you're moving, it pretty much does cover the entire body, not just your feet, not just your leg. But that ballast, the anatomical ballast of your body, it reestablishes. Once you move forward, you reestablish your center of gravity with every movement of your feet. And that is why pivoting is so interesting, because as you develop, when you become that right-handed or left-handed person, or right dominant or left dominant person, some things are starting to happen with respect to the effort that's made within your body and your movement patterns. So the best way to think about it, of course, are to think about the activities that really, enhance or underscore the significance between a right-handedness versus a left-handedness, like swinging a baseball bat. So just think about the swing of a baseball bat for a second. If you are a right-handed swinger of a baseball bat, your right leg stabilizes you as you hold the bat in position. Your right hand is in the top position on the bat's handle. Your left hand is at the bottom. And it's your right shoulder that guides the pattern of movement as your torso twists to the left, and hopefully you make contact with the ball, and your right leg, which is bent, so the basis of your stability is in your right glute and your right thigh, and then your left foot is the pointing foot when you are extending your arms forward and you've made contact with the ball, hopefully. Then the bat kind of basically ends up in a stopping position that corresponds to the position of your left leg. So there's a real defined difference between what's going on the right side of your body versus what's going on the left side of the body. And of course, the opposite would be the case if you're swinging the bat like a left-handed person. Those differences are way subtle when we're talking about basic movements, when we're talking about just walking. But what happens as a result of years of various things that you might be doing with your right side of the body versus your left side of the body, it means that the right side's stability has developed in a different way than the left side's stability. And again, this is so subtle. Unless you are an athlete, someone training maybe every day for or multiple times per week for something really specific, you're not necessarily going to see or experience how those differences manifest themselves in your regular life. But it's true that one side is always slightly stronger than the other. And that seems really odd to most people that this can be this can be the case. But it's one of the main reasons why functional exercise should really be based on your sustainable balance, your stability. And it's why, as a coach, I have a great deal of disdain for consumer-based exercise regimens, particularly ones in like big box facilities with, really fancy equipment and club music and beautiful amenities and really expensive memberships or not expensive memberships. It doesn't really matter. But the idea that the beginning of your exercise experience is to, put on your gym clothes and then jump on a cardio machine is a misleading attempt to get you going, to trigger your, to sate your appetite to, as a consumer, to begin that exercise consumer experience. And it helps in terms of your psychological feeling towards going to the gym to just get into it by being on the treadmill. But that perpetuates these imbalances because you're not warmed up, because your body is not prepared with the stimulation of your stability and your balance. When you start moving your legs, pivoting, and bicycling is the same thing. You're using one leg, you're using the other. One leg, left leg, left leg, right, left, and on and on and on. So the pattern exists so easily that you don't even recognize that it's happening. But because one side is slightly stronger than the other, you are automatically engaged in a pattern of activity that exacerbates the differences between the strength in the two sides of your body. Now, I really want to continue into some of the other components of that, but I also want to stop for a second and have you do a couple of deep breathing exercises, because we always do that in these podcasts. I never like to just talk. I don't use guests, but I do tell fun stories, and I've got a fun story to tell you about some research that I did for my book that went into the book when I was on summer break with my elementary school kid a couple of years ago that I discovered this, and we're going to go into it in just one second. But let's have a couple of minutes of thinking about your body parts, thinking about your own center of gravity. Your center of gravity. And again, it really does start and stop with your extremities. So think about where your head is and think about the position of your shoulders. You can extend your arms out to the sides if you want, or if they're down beside your body, that's fine too. But you can roll your shoulders forward and back a little bit so that you get a sense of that rotational, the rotator cuff is such a sophisticated piece of engineering. Mother Nature is really quite a genius. And when you turn your palms out, if you're standing and your hands are beside your body, your thumbs often point forward as a regression from what is actually neutral in terms of your anatomy. Your thumbs, if you turn your hands out a little bit and your thumbs don't point back completely, but point out to the side a little bit, your palms should actually open up forward about 45 degrees. And that's more a natural position for the rotator cuff and for your chest and your upper back, because that means that your shoulders and your ears can line up properly. When your palms turn in and your thumbs point forwards, your shoulders are rounded forward a little bit. You pull on the top of your back, and you collapse at your chest. And guess what also happens when that condition, when you sort of migrate into that neutral position, a changed neutral for you, you're collapsing your lung capacity a little bit. So your breathing actually opens up, which is really good if you are going to adopt an active lifestyle and begin to bicycle or swim or run. Maybe join me for a long run in Central Park in New York City sometime. You want to be able to breathe as efficiently as possible. And the way that you do that is, one of the ways, is by breathing deeply, but also by making sure that your posture is open to it. And then the last thing in terms of the postural system check, the last two things rather, is your pelvis position. You want to make sure that your pelvis is not tilting forward so that your butt sticks out. That contracts the lower back muscles and is not good for your hip flexors. So you want to make sure that your tailbone is tucked in a little bit and that you tug on your tummy muscles, pull your belly button in towards your spine in order to activate your tummy muscles. And then make sure that your hips, your knees, and your ankles are lined up in a straight line. And don't let your feet turn out. Big, big issue when people have turned out their toes where they are seeking greater stability. And I get why you'd want to do that. But if your feet are straight, you are supporting the stimulation of the ancillary, the support muscles, the structural side muscles that help maintain your balance. Once you turn your toes out, you are transferring that responsibility to the bigger muscles, to your quads and to your back. And you don't want to do that, even though it may seem natural because of the involuntary sedentary lifestyle that you might end up living. If you can force yourself to activate your body by forcing it to work harder to stabilize, then over time you're going to diminish the need to turn those feet out. Okay. Now we've done a couple of deep breaths, hopefully in the process of thinking about your body parts. Inhaling through your nose and exhaling through your mouth is super important. And I want to get to a couple of exercises. So I'm going to move on and tell you this fun story about what I discovered in colonial Williamsburg, which I highly recommend to anyone to go. Forget those trips to the to like sort of the fancy amusement park areas like in Florida and California, trips to the beach and to resorts. That's fun. And actually in Williamsburg, there is my favorite amusement park, because I worked there for 10 years, is Busch Gardens in Williamsburg, Virginia. And I loved being a Carnival employee, and I did it for the first all of my adult years before I moved to New York City. I was an employee in the operations department at Busch Gardens and ended up running the sort of ticketing and parking part of Busch Gardens before I moved up to New York. So I love amusement parks, roller coasters and spinning rides, all that stuff I'm still a big fan of. And you can do that when you go to Williamsburg, but in colonial Williamsburg, where you can learn about the 18th century life of people in this part of the, of our country's founding, before and after the American Revolution. It's really fun to sort of immerse yourself in the family activities that they put on there. And one of the things that my daughter and I learned about was the brick making that they did. So in this time, well, let me just go back to like sort of the idea, the repetitive motion, which is what pivoting really is, right? Repetitive motion, one leg and then the other. People that lived in colonial Williamsburg would not have had any clue what pivoting is or repetitive motion was, and the people didn't even really talk about exercise back then. people in upper classes in, times before consumer-based exercise. They walked, they leisurely walked. They might have ridden their horses for hunting and sport. I've done a whole bunch of writing within the book about the advantages of being in riding horses and things like archery and hunting sports that would have given the body some vigor and kept it healthy. But there would not have been any machines that elevated the heart rate and potentially move them from one place or the other, like a bicycle. However, most people were engaged in some form of labor, and many of those forms of labor elevated the heart rate to some degree. Some incorporated some repetitive motion. Now, a lot of repetitive motion in those days would have been upper body focused in terms of weeding, harvesting, pumping water, chopping wood, hammering nails, those kinds of things. Activities like this would have made up the livelihood of lots and lots of families. So probably children and adults were taking part in this, but repetitive motion for the lower body really wasn't prevalent in colonial times, and therefore we wouldn't have really understood the impact that it had on the lower body. But there is an exception to this, and this is what I discovered. So the making of clay bricks is this fascinating sort of exercise in understanding the history, because we tend to think, I don't know if anyone actually thinks about how buildings are constructed, homes are constructed, and brick homes are probably not built as much as they used to be. But when you think about the construction of a brick building, you normally think that there's some place where all of the bricks are made, and then the bricks are brought to the location where the house is built, and then the house is constructed using the what's the stuff that goes in between? I don't even know what it's called, but it's constructed. The house is constructed by the bricks that are brought into a stacked on a slab at a construction site. In colonial Williamsburg times, they didn't transport bricks; they made them where they needed them. So they created this workspace. And this, by the way, goes to the pivoting. I'm going to tell this story. We're going to do a couple of exercises, and then I'm going to let you go. So they had to construct a workspace where they took timber and they shaded it because they had to keep the clay moist. And this is where the repetitive motion comes into play. They would shovel out the clay and go to the river, the James River, which is right there near Williamsburg, wood and lots of sort of offshoots of it. They would have shoveled it into like some sort of a cart and then carted it over to the location. And underneath this sheltered space, they would have made a little pit. And the pit probably like 200 square feet, like 10 by 20 or maybe 10 by 10 or maybe something slightly bigger. But the raw clay would have been in about a foot deep, give or take. And the biggest part of the job of making the clay bricks was keeping the clay malleable. How did they do that? They stepped in it. There were several servants, or several workers rather, laborers, that would have stepped into the clay in bare feet, and they had a system actually for doing this. So they would plant the outside of the midfoot into the clay first, then roll the foot flat, pressing down with the heel first, and then lifting up the heel so that the big toe was last, so that it could interact the most, like the deepest, with the clay itself before taking the next step. Now, you get to do this in colonial Williamsburg. Now, literally, if you go this summer, which I highly recommend again, we did this. We actually will do it, I'm sure, again this summer because my daughter loves it, thinks it's the greatest thing, where you go and visitors that participate in this activity take off your shoes, roll up your pants if you have longer pants on, and then you can get into the clay pits. And I tell you, I'm, a marathon coach. My heart rate is strong. My legs are strong. Within 3 steps of this job, the heart rate has elevated and it stays elevated. But this was, for segments of time, 20 to 30 minutes or so, a serious workout. And back even in those days, you would have a right-handed person would have been able to press a little deeper, do a little more work with the right leg than with the left leg. So we go back to the symmetry and think about the best ways to mitigate the manifestations of this imperfect symmetry. And so to take it seriously as we start to finish up here a little bit, what I want you to think about is are exercises that force your legs to work independently of one another. Now, if you're standing up right now or you're sitting right now and you have the ability to stand up right now, one of the things that you can do just to test your strength is to let's try a simple lighthouse exercise. So this is a combination of a pivoting exercise, plus it also engages your balance. So it's a 2-part exercise, but or it affects 2 sort of segments of your functional movement strength. But if you position your feet heel to toe with your dominant foot towards the rear, then you will be able, as you turn your head with your arms out to the sides, you turn your head, you will feel the imbalances as you turn your head because you're activating your vestibular system. That's the balance component of the inner ear equilibrium. And the little muscles in your legs, in your feet, will start to heat up a little bit. You'll feel that energy drifting down towards your lower extremities. But the foot to the rear, in this case, your right leg, is going to absorb a little bit more of that typically, unless you force your front leg to do more work. But your rear foot tends to absorb a little bit more of that pressure. And so you'll feel it a little bit differently with the right leg to the rear versus the left leg to the rear. So go ahead and switch legs so that the other foot is positioned in the back, and try to turn your head again. That should help a little bit underscore the difference between the right side strength versus your left side strength. The other thing that you can do is a simple lunge, a forward basic lunge. So if you are standing with your feet next to each other, about hip width apart, hands on your hips or out to the sides, take a big step forward with the right leg, and then bend both knees to about 90 degrees, assuming that your knees are strong enough to execute a lunge. Of course, if you have questions about your own limitations, and you always should talk to your doctor before you begin any exercise type of movement, definitely take this, and then just absorb the information before you start doing it. But if you do the same exercise with the left leg, where you step forward with the left leg and bend both knees at 90 degrees, you're likely going to feel a difference in the difficulty. One side is going to be harder than the other. But lunges are probably the best exercise that will help define and then redevelop and even out the strength in your legs. There's a version of the squat that I like to do that is another way to help emphasize the one leg versus the other in order to obviously build out and equilibrate the strength between the 2 sides of your body. If you sit down and back into a chair, an imaginary chair or an actual chair, and then as you come up, you lift up one leg to the side. It's called a sumo squat. And then you go back into your squat, and then when you come back up, you lift the other leg up. And again, that exercise forces the right leg to be isolated and support the lift of the left leg. And then as you go into the squat, where you come back up and you have the left leg stabilize, which forces the left leg to allow the right leg to lift up. So you're forcing the legs to work independently of one another. And that is the key to developing a pivoting pattern that is sustainable for the rest of your life. I'm Coach Kim from InShape Fitness. I'll be back next week with another episode of the InShape Fitness Show. In the meantime, if you have any questions about your own everyday fitness, your own routines, any help that you need with respect to moving forward and developing a consumer fitness free based workout regimen, please let me know. You can reach us at bodybyInshape.com or on social media. I will see you again very soon.